Let's see, I had no knowledge of the Half-Life series before I played Stress Level Zero's Boneworks. I loved it half to death, despite some hiccups, and you can catch my full thoughts on the card in the top corner. But while it was making its rounds, I kept hearing people compare it to Half-Life. I mean, sure, I'd heard of it growing up, but my first Valve title was Left 4 Dead and its sequel, and I hadn't seen much of what Half-Life has to offer save for a clip here or there in a YouTube video. Fans never receiving the third entry in the series became the butt of almost every joke on the internet for over a decade. The fact that Steam is the largest distributor of digital games on PC and they take 30% of any title's given sales beyond a threshold, they didn't really need to make a third entry. They didn't need to make anything. Thus, we haven't seen a new fully fledged title since Dota 2 back in 2013. But now, here we are, and I have to give props to Valve. They went and made the entirety of the Half-Life series free to play at the end of January, up until the release of Alyx. So, I took advantage of this, and I caught myself up like a Netflix binge session. And I think I'll briefly share my thoughts on the games that came before, so you have a better idea of what I enjoy from these games. Half-Life 1. I can't really recommend this game, besides those who are truly looking to see how the series started. To be clear, I'm playing the version of the game that Steam currently has listed as Half-Life 1. I have no experience with any of the other releases, and I'm sure Black Mesa is a far smoother experience, but I was going for authenticity here. For the uninitiated, in Half-Life you play as Gordon Freeman, a scientist who seems to have more experience whooping ass than being a scientist. The research facility you work for, Black Mesa, made a mistake and now aliens are invading, so it's up to you to stop it. To the game's credit, I can clearly see how it was revolutionary for the time. The way the AI interacts with you and itself is incredible, truly the coolest thing about the game. But there are several reasons to keep your distance, and I would say Gordon's control is a big contributing factor. His base movement speed is so fast that I constantly found myself slipping and sliding everywhere early on, and squeezing my keyboard when the game decided to make me do some platforming. The number and variety of weapons you got were pretty cool, and the enemies were always threatening, which means the gunfights were fun, but only for a short time. It got boring with the amount it throws at you. It was certainly an ambitious title though, and I was quite impressed many times. But that helicopter section on the side of the cliff... It was definitely a tough game. But I think a more appropriate description would just be archaic. But thankfully, this was all made much better for the sequel, Half-Life 2. I think you would be perfectly fine to jump into Half-Life with this game. The only thing you really miss from not playing 1 before 2 are some callbacks, winks, and nods. Other than that, 2 is an improvement in every sense of the word. It's a lot more action-packed, with flashy spectacles around every corner, and a larger emphasis on a strong narrative through a recurring cast of great characters. Moving from the stiff and rigid constraints of the Gold Source engine in 1 to the freedom and pure entertainment of the Source engine made this game so much more enjoyable to me. The physics and ways you can manipulate certain objects can be a lot of fun, but by today's standards, it got pretty boring for me. Playing them both back to back, the weapons you come across feel very similar, and by episode 2, I was getting sick of the shootouts and just wanted to know what was happening in the narrative. Thus, I feel like Half-Life 2 lost my full attention much sooner than it should have. It was much more interested in telling you a compelling story and giving you a bigger experience because, Jesus, that ending. But it still went on a bit long for me given the amount of downtime it forces you into, complementing the most brain-dead gunfights. But even with all my griping, I'm glad I played it, and I think you should too.
but for full price.
Probably not. If you must play one or both, I recommend waiting until they're each under $10. But the fans have been waiting to conclude this story for quite some time, and again, after that ending, I am too. Hopefully, this can make me a true Half-Life fan and give us all the closure we deserve. So, let's not waste any more time. Let's jump into Half-Life Alyx. Wait, it's a prequel? No! The game opens up with an immediate spoiler for Half-Life 2 Episode 2. It tells us that this game takes place 5 years before the death of Eli Vance, or our main protagonist's father. Yes, throughout the adventure, you take control of Alyx Vance, if the title wasn't any indication. The roughly 13 to 14 hour long story will see you traversing City 17 on a quest to ultimately get the Combine off your planet and save the human race, with some curveballs thrown in for good measure. Given that it is a Half-Life game, it is heavily narrative driven. Therefore, I'm going to give my thoughts on how the narrative presentation made the transition into VR. So, the fact that the games before were all completely cutscene free was a big deal. No other game had done anything like that before Half-Life 1, and cutscenes just wouldn't work in a VR setting anyway, so the tradition was carried into Alyx. But I don't think it was an aspect that was pushed to be on that same level of innovation. Let me explain. So, in the old games, you would essentially find the next story-sensitive segment, and a bunch of characters would dump the exposition you need at that time on you, while you could still freely move around. That's cool. It gives players the option to walk around and still have the freedom of movement if they don't care too much about the story. Now, the flaws of that system are that you just can't skip these sections because they're a part of the game. It has its pros and its cons. Now, back in Alyx, you still have this same concept. You're essentially tied down to a certain area and have to finish listening to the character dump the exposition on you, or watch the set piece finish exploding. Granted, it's a lot more visually stimulating because of the fact that it's simply in VR. But the cool thing here is that you could make these story sections so much more engaging. In VR, you have that level of constant interactivity available, so while the story interactions aren't bad, or even uninteresting per se, it's just noticeably lacking when compared to the overwhelming interactivity of the rest of Alyx. The game already highly emphasizes exploration and searching every nook and cranny, so why not hide some environmental narrative in these areas? Or better yet, some more of the collectibles that are already strewn about? Or better yet, have the character in front of you interact more. Make them ask to grab your hand or something small like that. There's so many avenues you could take to further connect the player to this world through little interactions that sell you on the setting and the characters. As it stands, you feel more like you're watching a really good 4D movie, instead of being an actual part of the narrative. Hell, they were already on the right track with Russ's introduction in the beginning of the game. It's chock full of opportunities for unique interaction, but that and the elevator meeting with the Combine soldiers were the only times I can remember something like that happening. But speaking of Russ, he's a totally new character to the story of Half-Life. Narratively, he serves as an anchor for Alyx and in turn the player to latch onto. He's the typical slightly awkward scientist that you've seen before 1,000 times, but he never became tiresome or got on my nerves. He has this really great back and forth with Alyx. You can believe that the two of them become friends through all the dialogue and hardships they overcome. There are lots of humorous moments, like Russ telling Alyx about turkey club sandwiches.
Alyx, have you ever heard of a club sandwich?
Nope, not once.
Right. To make a club sandwich, you need to start with bread. Not you add tomatoes, lettuce, not vegetable paste, fresh. Then you add bacon. That's from an animal we used to call the pig.
You guys had all that? That's insane.
It is. And I'm not done. Then you add a second sandwich on top of the first one.
Or the to-be-famous porta potty exchange.
Oh, do you need a minute? Because, I could pause the feed.
Just looking, Russ.
And there are also really heartfelt moments too. I mainly like the guy because he was there for me, as cheesy as that sounds, I know. When the game gets a little scary and you feel really uncomfortable, Alyx asks him if he could just talk to her. And if you know me, you know I'm a huge bitch when it comes to scary stuff. So it's nice that he actually keeps me company in these really stressful situations where I feel alone. But he basically serves as mission control throughout the adventure. But he also supplies you with your initial tools. After getting rescued by one of Russ's drones, you find yourself back in his hideout, where he formulates the game plan and then supplies you with the main gimmick of the game, the gravity gloves. These little things are your bread and butter. Essentially, all they do is allow you to pull things towards you from a distance. But this small interaction opens up so many avenues for player interactivity. The simple action of bringing an object toward you can be applied to so many engaging and fun situations. Snatching a grenade from the enemy and sending it back. Grabbing an ammo box but not catching it so it breaks on the wall behind you. Getting an item that's out of reach, grabbing an explosive and ruining the enemy's day. It's all so much fun, and they alone lead to the encounters being infinitely replayable. It works so well due largely in thanks to the new Source Engine 2, that makes just throwing objects and interacting with the world feel so natural and believable. It's crazy to see the leap in technology between entries too, but I'll talk visuals later. Oh, don't you worry about that. But back on the gloves. You know, I would be tempted to say it's a more engaging mechanic than the force pull in Boneworks. The force pull is more kinetic and has much more limited potential, while the gravity gloves feel more like something a scavenger would have. Someone who isn't a fighter by nature would use this more exploratory tool. But the two techniques essentially do a variation of the same thing, but I don't think these games are very comparable, for reasons I'll explain in a moment. But besides the gravity gloves, you're also supplied with a semi-automatic pistol at first. And as you go on in your journey, you'll find a few other tools that help make the journey a little easier. You can come across some grenades that are probably my favorite means to fight because it's so satisfying to activate them and then lob them over. Eventually you can find a shotgun and a combine assault rifle like in Half-Life 2. However, taking some cues from Doom 2016, you can upgrade your weapons with different attachments, rates of fire, and enhancements. I got some pretty good use out of the shotgun's grenade launcher, the laser sights for the pistol and rifle were very useful, and the autoloader for some guns were very helpful in the heat of a fight. But I honestly think there could have been more creative upgrades on display here. By the end of the story, you've basically maxed out each weapon, so it's especially clear that they were all very lacking in the originality department. I mean, not counting the laser sight that you can get for all of the weapons, the shotgun has 3, the pistol has 3, and the assault rifle only has 2. And that's including a pretty useless reflex sight for the pistol and assault rifle. I didn't expect Alyx to have an arsenal like Gordon's, but I think she's a good enough tinkerer to come up with more interesting upgrades than these. I still enjoy what we did get, but I just think we missed some opportunities for non-conventional weapons. The encounters with the enemies don't leave me as wanting, however. You know, the way that new enemies are introduced to the player is really appreciated. Yet to be encountered enemies usually appear far away or behind a fence before you have to worry about being in any real danger. I love this because you get to see what they can do and usually how to kill them the first time around. And the variety of enemies we have here took me by surprise too, and they all play a very vital role on the battlefield. You have the returning Combine soldiers that come in many different flavors this time and are probably the most dangerous enemies you fight. Some are weaker of course, and some have power armor and heavy weapons that are sure to drain your health quick, so they kind of make themselves your top priority on the battlefield. Some even play the defensive game with these big shields, so you have to switch up your tactics too. They can even send out the Razorbot things now, so you have to be sure on what you want to prioritize. Antlions make a return and are much more intimidating now, but their legs are destructible, making it a bit of a decision when you fight them now. Do you go for the legs and make it easier for yourself, or do you go for that weak point and an instant kill? You have the basic zombie variant, which is very easy to kill, but no Combine zombies, or the hunters for that matter. There are the returning head crabs and all their terrifying variants. Of course, you have the basic one, but we also have the beefier black ones that still poison you. We now have armored head crabs that were tough at first before you learn how they work, and just as before, they serve as the enemy that will lunge very recklessly at you and then leave themselves wide open after that. Each of the enemies fill an important role on the battlefield, just the way they should. It makes for a very smooth difficulty curve as you go along too. Oh, plus you have these lightning dog things that are the coolest enemy to fight. They're sort of like little mini bosses on their own. They can even infect hosts and make the fight even tougher. And yes, when they scurry around me, I freak out. You know what? Let's use that to transition into the level design, because I have a bone to pick with someone on this team. Was it you, Gabe? I know it was you, Gabe.
Gabe likes Miracle Whip.
So, the head crabs, like I mentioned, are mostly always introduced in good places where you can clearly see the threat before they come at you. The designers are good people at this point. They're looking out for us bitch gamers. But then, later on, they think to themselves, hey, so they've made it this far in the game? You guys want to fuck with them? I screamed like a girl so many times because of things that were unexpected. The threat was always easily dealt with, but oh, come on, man. Then, when the game knows the setting is scary and something could spring up and jump at you, nothing ever does. It's like they know that they're being bullies, but they just enjoy it. But if the trade-off for these environments being as interesting and detailed as a few jump scares, I guess I can take that. The way each and every nook and cranny are jam-packed with things to interact with, things to see, optional side challenges, goodies behind every turn, it makes it such a joy to explore the game. And I totally forgot to write something down about the puzzles, so I'm coming back and recording something. Even if I didn't think too much of them, they never really got on my nerves. It usually just took me a second to find the solution and then reap the rewards. They just were kind of nothing to me. The level designers really put their all into these super detailed places that beg you to open every possible door, every possible filing cabinet, just to check and see what could be inside. This applies to the gameplay scenarios too. The blind super infected Jeff comes to mind, where you make your way through an abandoned distillery using bottles of vodka to guide him where he needs to be. But it also plays into that basic exploration and finding just what you need in the middle of a fight. That kind of stuff goes such a long way in making this game feel so lived in and ripped through, all the while you're just trudging along in the aftermath. And good God, I can honestly say this is the prettiest VR game I have ever seen, if not one of the prettiest games in general I've ever seen. I played this game on the highest settings possible, and it did get a little choppy on occasion, but it was pretty smooth most of the time, so I couldn't help myself but be in awe of this game's use of light and shadows. It's so breathtaking, and it helps to sell this situation. The characters are animated so well, they're so expressive and detailed in both looks and movement, everything is visually distinct. I love the color choices in some areas, the music that complemented powerful moments were enchanting, and there were never any dull moments from what I can remember. I got a little burned out on seeing the same infected areas and apartment complexes / indoor areas, but again, I think these were so the designers could make the most of the situation and pack them full of things to do and find. But I have to wonder, is the trade-off for these environments looking so good that we have to deal with these ridiculous load times? Because they're bad. It will take upwards of a minute or two to load some areas, and the same goes for respawning after a death. These obnoxious load times that pause the pace of the game were distracting yet forgivable in the previous ones, but I would have thought that this would be a feature we learned how to work around after all these years. And I did have a few hang-ups about how the player character is handled too. So in Alyx, the only thing you see are your hands. I get why, but when I'm playing and throwing objects through where my body should be, yet enemy gunfire registers a hit, it kind of throws me out of it for a little. I've read interviews that claim they didn't add melee weapons like the iconic crowbar because they found that it would get constantly stuck on objects. So in order to keep the game from feeling clunky, they removed it. And yeah, I totally could see that. Your objects and limbs get stuck in boneworks all the time, but in that game, you can actually see your whole body. So at least for me, I knew it was my fault for not getting my arms out of the way. Sometimes my hands would freak out in that game, yes, but it seems like the team on Alyx decided it was best to just cut the loss and make it more playable. And I can't fault them for that, I'm not saying that. It makes total sense when they say that they, quote, lost like a year and a half of our lives trying to get a crowbar in VR. And I know, The crowbar and a body aren't the same thing, but I think if you figure one out and settle in on it, you can make the other work. I'm no expert, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but as it stands, the lack of a body makes the game feel a little off to me. Like, when you jump, you point a cursor and then teleport there. And how you can quickly scamper up ladders by grabbing the first rung and then let the game do the rest. Or how about when you fall from a ledge and Alyx floats down like Mary Poppins? I just feel a little off-put by these choices. In all actuality, a crowbar probably would have been an outright bad inclusion. Firstly, because melee combat wouldn't work with how these enemies are designed. All of the enemies are very dangerous, and the whole point of most encounters is to keep the enemies away from you because they would instantly drain your health. So even a single melee weapon would have to call the entire enemy cast to be reworked to accommodate that playstyle. It's much more satisfying as a ranged game anyway, and secondly, because you're playing as Alyx, not Gordon. Alyx is about using her quick wit to narrowly escape or outsmart the enemy. It's just faithfulness to the character. Towards the end of the game, you come in contact with a Strider. See, if we were Gordon, we would pull out one of our many weapons and just take it down. But as Alyx, we get chased through a collapsed parking deck and then through some more rubble, hiding from his gunfire within the brakes, and then luckily finding a cannon to take it down. After that, oh yeah, major spoiler territory ahead. Skip to here to catch my final thoughts. After that, you get brought up to the ship, and in true Half-Life fashion, get a major power upgrade to your gloves. You can now grab these balls of energy and shoot the lightning back at the Combine. It was the most cathartic and amazing part of the game, and I loved every second of it. After that, you're standing outside of Gordon Freeman's supposed prison. You set him free, but in a twist that no Half-Life fan was surprised by, it was actually the G-Man who greets us. The creepy fellow bargains with Alyx, asking her if she would like a job in exchange for something she wants. Not unlike the same question he asked Gordon all the way back in the first game. But canonically, Gordon did take the job offer back then. That is, until he apparently refused the G-Man shortly afterward and got fired somehow. So Alyx takes the offer. So you then find yourself in the same spot you were in 16 years ago, as Gordon Freeman. But instead of Eli being dead, he's okay, he's alive. And I'm still a little confused on this. Does this mean that Alyx rewrote history thanks to the G-Man and saved her father, putting us in a new timeline? Well, none of those questions gets answered. Instead, you take your crowbar and Eli seems to know of the G-Man's meddling somehow, so it's up to you to stop him. But not here. The credits roll immediately after that. Thus, my new name for this game? Cocktease Alyx. And it's not an entirely derogatory term either. Look, I knew the chances were slim, but I was hoping that we would get some sort of resolution to the ending of episode 2. And yes, while we did get something of the sort, it raised just as many, if not more questions than we had in 2004. How does Eli know about the G-Man? What happened to Russ? Why or how did Gordon get fired? Why were we shown all these projections of the G-Man living a normal life? What happened to the other telepathic alien that escaped in episode 2? Where is Alyx now? I feel like we're in just as much of the dark narratively as we were before this game came out. And I guess that's kind of what being a Half-Life fan is at this point, huh? Constant uncertainty. But I guess you can be certain of one thing. Half-Life Alyx is a spectacular game. It's a phenomenal game. With combat that takes advantage of the best aspects of the other Half-Life games, it nails what it was trying to be with flying colors. The exploratory nature of the previous games was made to be blown up into these lifelike, explorable environments. Each and every gunfight feels unique, and there is never a dull moment for sure. The game is drop-dead gorgeous at times too. The amount of detail in the world is awe-inspiring. The footage can't do it justice. And while I think that some important elements for the experience are missing, that doesn't stop this game from becoming a must-have for any VR user. If you have VR already, it's likely that you have this already, and I hope you're loving it. But if you're a Half-Life fan out there on the fence, I would say it's worth it. VR is so much more than what you see in advertisements. But I understand it's a tough call in the financial department. But I would say go for it if you can. And seeing the reassurance this game has given Valve, I'd say we'll be getting a real sequel soon enough. But until then, I'm content going back through Alyx on a harder difficulty. Valve told us this is the start of a new chapter for Half-Life, and they're far from being finished. So I'd say now is a great time to jump in if you're even slightly interested. And if you really feel the need to start your Half-Life journey with the beginning of the story, I suggest preparing yourself for quite the readjustment for the time period. Or again, give the fan-made project Black Mesa a shot. It recreates the first Half-Life in the Source engine, but I don't know how much of a faithful adaptation it is. I hear it's gotten good reviews, so I'd say it couldn't be much worse than the original release. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.